Greetings and welcome. I am JustaVOR, bringing you what I hope is constructive information on what the system of white supremacy, racism, is and how it works, as well as what can be done to replace it with the system of justice. Racial classification confusion, white and non-white in a system of white supremacy. In our previous video entitled Primary Tactics Suspected Racists Use According to the Code, we noted one of the 6 primary tactics used by white supremacists to maintain the system of white supremacy as racial classification confusion. In this video, we will take a deeper look at the racist strategy of racial classification confusion and how it is used to deceive, spread confusion, and maintain the system of white supremacy, racism. I am sure you, at least once, have been asked the question, what is your race? The question may seem a simple one. It is likely whatever you were told when you were young, probably a color, or something that translates into a color. Yes, the answer to the quote-unquote race question seems simple enough, at least until one begins to ask others the same. Then we get responses that become very confusing, from colors such as black, white, red, yellow, brown, etc., or names related to places such as Mexican, Guatemalan, Chinese, and Japanese, or words related to languages such as Arabic or Latino, even words related to religions such as Jewish or Sikh. But what is a race? Asking this question exposes the lack of simplicity that explains the diversity, so to speak, in the types of responses we get to the race question. Is race biological? Does one's skin color determine their so-called race? Is it social, religious, or political? On this channel, we have explored this question in previous videos and have concluded that not only does race have nothing to do with biology or anthropology, meaning it has nothing to do with what one looks like or what their skin color is, but that there is only one race, the white race. But why do other people not see it this way? Well, my conclusion is that we have been miseducated to misunderstand the concept of race and how it works. Regardless of what we were told, evidence has demonstrated that the concept of race is social, political in its nature, and that what people think of as their race is just a justification set forth by the power group that is being able to deceive, manipulate, and force other groups of people to see race as the power group desires. As the dominant power group is those who classify themselves as white, and since this group is the only group that behaves like a race, we have concluded that race equals racism equals white supremacy. If you listen to people discussing the topic of racism, you will notice that these 3 terms are used interchangeably, but nonetheless, non-white people, victims of racism, are still confused into thinking that race and racial classifications are the same. This is because of that miseducation of non-white people imposed on them by the white power group. Not only has this deception been reinforced in social practices, but in law. Taking the United States concept as an example, we will look at racial classification and the confusion it causes. The legal race question can be found on the United States Census Bureau website, census.gov. The U.S. Census Bureau has been used since the 1860s to document the so-called racial classifications those who classify themselves as white have created. According to the Census Bureau collects race data according to U.S. Office of Management and Budget guidelines, and these data are based on self-identification. People may choose to report more than one race group. People of any race may be of any ethnic origin. Here's one deception. Although it is claimed that racial classification is based on self-identification, if you're non-white according to white people and they need to identify you, let's say to report you to law enforcement, it will not matter what you self-identify as if you fit the description of a non-white person. I think those who classify themselves as Moorish Americans can testify to this. Going back to the Census Bureau website, if we look at the About the Topic of Race page, we will find the official U.S. government definitions of the same racial classifications used on government documents such as birth certificates, death certificates, applications for employment, education, housing, and more. We've asked this question before, but let's ask it again here. If race didn't matter, if one's racial classification didn't matter in today's society, why ask for these classifications? Many applications today do state that answering the question is optional. But have you noticed that on some documents, there is no option to opt out of these questions? Interesting, isn't it? On the topic of race page, the official racial classifications listed are: white, a person having origins in any of the original peoples of Europe, the Middle East, or North Africa. Black or African American, a person having origins in any of the black racial groups of Africa. American Indian or Alaska Native, a person having origins in any of the original peoples of North or South America, including Central America, and who maintains tribal affiliation or community attachment. Asian, a person having origins in any of the original peoples of the Far East, Southeast Asia, or the Indian subcontinent, including, for example, Cambodia, China, India, Japan, Korea, Malaysia, Pakistan, the Philippine Islands, Thailand, and Vietnam. Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, a person having origins in any of the original peoples of Hawaii, Guam, Samoa, or other Pacific Islands. It would appear that the U.S. government doesn't consider racial classifications to be scientific or based on biology or phenotype, but rather on where one's ancestors originated from. Which ancestors? Because if you're being logical, you will recognize that each person living today would have countless ancestors. Try doing the math to see how many you have. If we're being honest, most people today have ancestors who will be given differing racial classifications. So which do you base your racial classification on? Truth is, it doesn't matter. All that matters is if you're classified as white or not. And in the end,
the supremacist always does the classified.
I would like to note that the term person in the legal sense is not the same as person in the natural sense, which is the way most people use it. In the legal context, according to Cornell Law University, a person includes corporations, contracts, partnerships, or memberships, officers, and employees of such. I would suggest going to any state or federal government website and looking at their laws, statutes, codes, etc., which by nature are contracts, and often include definitions of terms used in the contract, including the term person, and looking up the definition of person for clarification. Why did I bring this up? Because persons singular, persons plural, and people often have vastly different meanings within the legal context and are often tied to the alleged rights and freedoms of quote unquote the people. I would caution you to be very careful when studying this aspect of legality, as I am no law expert, nor am I an attorney, and I do recognize the rabbit hole of deception and confusion one can easily fall into when studying this aspect of law and certain theories related to it. The focus here is to understand the system of white supremacy, racism, what it is and how it works, in an effort to replace it with a system of justice. If you've been studying the system of white supremacy, you may be less confused enough to know that white supremacy is, by default, anti-black. To keep white people in power, someone has to be the default bottom rung of white society. In this case, it is the group officially or unofficially classified as black. Non-white people as a whole are to be under those who classify themselves as white, but in the tactic of divide and conquer, these racial classifications reinforce the idea that black is supposed to be at the very bottom rung of white society, or more accurately, the global system of white supremacy, racism.
The black people learn, all non-white people over the world learn. If you're black, stay back. If you're yellow, you're brown, stick around. If you're yellow, mellow, white, right.
Did you catch the anti-blackness hidden in the Census Bureau's definition of U.S. racial classifications? Going back to the listed classifications, did you notice how every group is based on a person having origins in any of the original peoples of a particular place, while black is based on a person having origins in any of the black racial groups of Africa? What is a black racial group of Africa? Weren't people in Africa, prior to the white supremacist racist classification systems, defining themselves by their bloodline, ancestral lineage, tribal or national associations, which define themselves as a black racial group? Remind you, in the legal context, people give power to persons. It is the recognized liberties, rights, and freedoms of natural people who create and give power to governments and other social systems that create laws to rule or govern. Even with white being at the top and most non-white people being under white people, they are apparently recognized as persons who get their rights and freedoms from some group of people that relate it back to some area on the earth. But black people? Nope. Just some persons from a racial group in Africa, meaning that they have no inherent rights? We know that this is only a covert legal justification to maintain the system of white supremacy by denying black people recognition of their natural inherent rights. We know that racists will say one thing and do another, that they will change the rules and laws at will to support this system of injustice in whichever way they deem fit at the time. This is all part of the racist strategy of racial classification confusion. According to the code, to counter the strategy of racial classification confusion, non-white people should use 3 terms as racial classifications: 1, white people; 2, non-white people; and 3, white supremacists, racists. When other people use any term other than these 3, one should ask for a detailed explanation that you can easily understand. Mr. Neely Fuller Jr. also suggests that we study all of the so-called racial classifications used by others, ask questions about anything said that seems to be contradictory, confusing, and/or non-explanatory, as well as be aware of and/or be alert for any so-called explanation that, instead of clarity, focus, and logic, only adds to the confusion. So what should one mark as their answer to the race question, as it is presented on documents and applications? This is more JustaVOR VGQ here, but I tried to leave the question unanswered. This is not always allowed. In such cases, I have known of attempted counter-racists using the section of the document labeled Other and marking NR, non-race, VOR, victim of racism, VOWS, victim of white supremacy, or some other related term. What about using multiple racial categories?
Just like a term that you hear now in popular parlance is the term biracial.
Yes.
Or multiracial. Or
What does that mean?
multicultural. Now, these are terms that the victims of racism will have to pick through and
Right.
try to, they are given this selective chart where they can determine if they are biracial and to what degree of biracialism, whatever that's supposed to mean, what degree of colorism, whatever that's supposed to mean.
Before we go, did you notice that there was no classification listed on the Census Bureau's page for so-called Hispanics or Latinos? I plan to explore racial classification confusion more in depth in a future video. But until then, why do you think that it is not listed with the others? What are your thoughts on how racial classifications on government documents are used to promote, maintain, expand, and/or refine the system of white supremacy, racism? How do you intend to answer the race question moving forward? Feel free to leave your questions, comments, and concerns. For more information about the purpose and goals of this channel, as well as some basic definitions of words and terms we use in reference to our work, I have included a link below to a video containing this information. If you would like an even better understanding of the code and how it works, please visit producejustice.com to order the United Independent Compensatory Code System concept by Mr. Neely Fuller Jr. There are many constructive suggestions for ending the system of white supremacy, and Mr. Fuller's code book and its word guide act as guides to getting and keeping on code. If you feel this content is constructive and worth your time and energy, Please subscribe and share to support the making of more content in the future. Much appreciation for all the VORs already subscribed. I am JustaVOR, and I am still learning. Thank you for watching. Until next time.
Let me say something that gets to the very crux of the matter, and this may be offensive for some to hear who are not on the side that we're on. White people, we have been the problem for 400 years.
Say that again.
Let me say it one more time for those of you who didn't hear me. White people, we have been the problem for 400 years.